It's the Awake Space Astrology Podcast. I'm Laurie Rivers, your host, here to help you with some inspiration to get those aspirations out into the world. Well, you've probably been feeling the energy because there's a whole lot of it. I hope you kept up with your protein and making sure you stayed hydrated. Don't skimp on your electrolytes. And I'm going to keep that as our primary advice as we go through the rest of August and September. We have a lot of energy brewing again this week. I know a lot of you are looking out at the storms forming in the Atlantic and in the Gulf, and predicting where those things land is almost impossible because it's highly erratic energy. And just like I always write in what's in the headlines in the Awake Space Astrology magazine, I always say it can look like a global event, like a human aggression, or it can look like a storm because both hold the same energy. There's a lot going on this week, and we are all able to sense what's going on at an instinctual level. We're all wired into what we call the collective unconscious. Everybody is. You just may not recognize that's why you're agitated, irritated, unable to sleep, etc. And that's why I'm always trying to bring us down to a space of at least neutral. All right, a neutral space or reasonable contentment if you can get there, which is kind of a luxury these days. But if you can find it, then you're more able to respond versus react. And that makes all the difference as we go through these very interesting times, because there's a lot of people who spend a lot of money on keeping you dysregulated, whether it's through physical acts of aggression or through media, even on social media. People who think they're doing the right thing aren't always contributing to the cause they want to support in how they message the information. So it's important to all of us to remember things don't have to be sensational to be important. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because we're going to talk about the French Resistance. Now, I've been talking about this for years and years and years, telling you think French Resistance, not French Revolution. And I'm going to do a two-part segment on that. The first part is here. The second part will be in the Patron-only podcast. And the astrology of the times is pretty interesting. And given what happened in Alaska, I'm going to take a look at the Stalin Pact as well. And if you're not sure what those are, don't worry about it. I'll explain it in that segment. As always, big thanks and shout outs to all of the patrons of the Awake Space. We do shout outs for our newest patrons. And by the way, some people think I've been just repeating their name out of being nice. The list stays current for about 2-3 weeks. Depends on how people are joining, etc. So I just read it till the list changes because there's a lot of people on that list. And that's our way of thanking our newest patrons for supporting the podcast. We have thousands of people in the Awake Space who help make this possible. And to all of our community members, you have my eternal gratitude. Oh, what a week. What a week, what a week, what a week. That full moon was nuts. And it was wild. I told you it would be. And I talked about it last week. If you missed that episode because it wasn't up on YouTube, it's there now. I put up the video version because for some reason, Creators for Spotify isn't slurping up my podcast to YouTube. I don't know why. You haven't been missed. I'm not declining to serve people on the YouTube, so we'll get the video up from last week. So, whatever we're doing, we're going to do it together. Whether we're driving to work, keep your hands on 10 and 2 because people are going to be just as agitated as always this week. Keep your hands on 10 and 2. Keep your eyes straight ahead. Don't let yourself be distracted. Driving is a great time to practice being present. Or whether we're doing the laundry, washing the dishes, typing away on a boring report, or we're taking the kids to school. I can't believe school has started already. And speaking of school, I need to give a big shout out to my youngest astrologer out there, Miss Charlotte. is starting preschool this week, pre-K. She's that big. She started listening to the podcast when she was only a couple of weeks old and mama was up at night. So big hugs to you, Miss Charlotte. You're such a big girl now. I look forward to hearing good things about you getting started with your new learning. So it's going to be okay, right? So get your tea, get your coffee, get your matcha, get your H2O, because we're going to settle in together here on the Awake Space. All right, let's get started. Wow, what a week. What a week it has been. I told you guys we weren't going to have any chill as we moved through 2025. We get a couple of days in September, just enough to take a breath, really. It's enough to take a breath. You can't afford to be exhausted right now. Everybody is all hands up on deck. You don't have to do anything big and glorious. In fact, there's not a whole lot of glory to go around for a little while. Sometimes learning how to still your mind, and it doesn't mean go to empty mind. It just means learning how to let the chatter move through you, is one of the greatest contributions you can make because of something we talked about last week, emotional contagion. Because emotions are contagious and human beings impact one another, whether we think we do or not. Okay, it's science. And one of the most subversive acts, besides radically loving yourself, besides learning to self-actualize and be determined in self-understanding, one of the greatest things you can do is learn to zip it and listen. Okay? Talking and having something to say and expressing it isn't always the most helpful thing. And one of the things I see on social media, and one of the things that makes me cringe in my own comment section, is people not understanding where we're at right now in the world and thinking that just saying whatever you feel like saying is just your God-given right and it won't have any repercussions. Now, free speech in the United States, as per the Constitution, as I was taught about it in a constitutional law course, has something to do with our ability to speak our mind to the government with no repercussions as long as we are not threatening harm. Now, that's gotten expanded over many years. However, there is a right and then there is smart. And I'm asking all of you to be smart as we proceed through the weeks and months remaining in 2025, and even as we move into the first part of 2026. Just because we think it doesn't mean we need to say it. It's important to move quietly. The people who are the most dangerous when you move through times that require subversion and resistance are those who are the loudest, those who are performative. They're very dangerous to any cause because they bring attention where it is unnecessary. Sometimes you need to work in silence. Sometimes you don't need to know everything. You just need to know your part. And that's why I teach you here on the podcast how to center, how to come to center, how to be present in the moment. Because by guarding your consciousness, you are not contributing to emotional contagion when we look at panic, stress, outrage, rage itself. All emotions are valid, but when we all get worked up, everybody gets worked up, and then we're at a disadvantage. And that's why if you've ever been in an abusive situation, you may find yourself triggered watching the news these days, because people who wish to dominate and control will do everything they can to dysregulate your nervous system. So learning not just how to regulate your emotions, but how to regulate your nervous system is really important. Now, some people are going to be more capable than others at that because consciousness is a spectrum. But learning how to step back and be quiet and become the observer is a very necessary skill right now. And we'll keep talking about it here on the podcast. And of course, as always, I talk about it in the Patreon. So this week we're heading towards a new moon, which happens in the early hours of August 23rd. The moon is part one of two Virgo new moons, and I'll talk about that in the next segment, about what it means to have a new moon sandwich. So it's going to be interesting. It's offering us quite the opportunity to put things in order, but not be controlling, nor be controlled. And that's something up on deck. Oh, and of course, I know all of you want to know when it is going to happen. I'm honestly really sick of the question. So I have said I don't see it till 2026. I've said that till I'm blue in the face. Some of you may be new listeners, so that's my answer. What we saw in Alaska concerned me to a degree, and I'll talk about that in the Patron only podcast and why that concerned me as I listened to the speeches. Because, man, that's one of the reasons I'm going to look at the Stalin Pact. But despair stops us from being effective. And I think it's really, really important to remember that being effective in our daily lives, our day-to-day, is one of the most important contributions we can make. I know we want to take on the big problems, but very few of us have the ability to do so. So it's important to gain some skills in that. So this week, talking about the French Resistance and some of the things the French Resistance did and how they operated, and how there's some interesting energy coming up in October of 2025. That is a little reminiscence of June 18th, 1940, when Charles de Gaulle put out the call for the people of France to resist the German occupation. It's an important part of history that I don't think really ever got covered very much, at least in secondary education. I was just so fortunate to have, one, had family who talked about those things. We studied a little bit about it, but it was a blip in the high school curriculum. But I met a general, actually I met three generals, back in 1985 when I was an exchange student to Brussels. My host mom had taken me to France, and I've talked about that story before. And I saw the cemetery full of rows of crosses and stars of David, and I was very disturbed by the immense amount of lost lives, because it seemed like a greater sacrifice than maybe was necessary. It didn't seem like the most prudent tactic, and I've always been very analytical. And I asked my host mom a lot of questions, like, did they really need to do this? Did all those people have to die? Because that's so rhetoric, oh, they gave their life so we could be free. And I wasn't convinced that it had to have gone that way. And we were taught, there was only one way. It was the only one way to do it, to end it, to take on the Germans. And that's how we were taught in school. But as I looked at the sheer numbers, I was like, there was no finesse, no art to it. And I'd always had kind of an interest in strategy itself. And I had studied, the ancient wars and things. And I just thought, boy, that was just very wasteful of both human beings and the damage done to the environment. I mean, it was 40 years since the end of World War II, and the land was still very scarred. Anywhere it had been taken, the obvious damage was there for all to see. And so my host mom arranged for me to meet several generals from Belgian generals who had managed to escape German occupation and got to England so they could work with the Free French. That's where a lot of the military people who had managed to get out of the lowlands worked with the British or the Free French, and they were working together. And under Lord Mountbatten and Charles de Gaulle, these generals helped plan the landing on D-Day. And they willingly listened and answered my questions. I was not reproached for asking questions. That was just something I'll never forget, because growing up, if I questioned decisions made by those before me, I thought, well, the greatest minds made those decisions and you shouldn't question that. We do that a lot in America. We say, don't question that. And I was never being really cheeky. I was just like, are you sure that was the best way we could do something? And I asked them questions like that. And in fact, I was so moved. And these were lovely old men. They were just really sweet old men. And at the end of life, in their 80s. And I remember saying, was there no other way? Were there no other options but to expend so many lives? I'm like, I understand it was important, and I understand the strategic nature of it, but were there no other ways to do it? And the General Ma'al, the one that answered most of my questions, the one I remember best, he said, that is something that keeps me up every night and has for 40 years, because there were other options, but Lord Mountbatten didn't want to take them. And that really stayed with me. And we talked for several hours after dinner, sitting under this beautiful, I believe it was an oak tree, and sipping Ricard, which is kind of like a licorice flavored aperitif. I had a lot of water in mine because I was young. But we talked about the philosophies and the agreements made in World War II, and they talked about their experience working with the Free French and helping people in the resistance on the ground, the guilt they felt for not being there. And it changed my world. And in fact, he said, you have such a good mind. We need good minds like yours. Please study international relations. I didn't even know what international relations was when I was 15. That was the first I'd heard of it. And I was absolutely mesmerized by the idea. And so I set my sights on that and said, oh boy, I'm going to do that when I go to college. I'm going to study international relations, because I thought if people just knew how to communicate better, if people could learn to understand one another, we wouldn't do so much damage to ourselves and the planet. I was a bit of an idealist, and I learned fairly quickly once I entered into university that indeed people knew how, they didn't want to. And it was a divine disillusionment, let me tell you. There is always another way. There is always another option. There is always another solution. Whether you see it or not is another story. Whether you want to do it or not is another story. And we're kind of faced in some times as we're on the flip side of 1939, 1940. And we watch the world and world leaders do some interesting things that hold the common man, the common woman, the common person in no regard whatsoever. And to my mind, that's not leadership. It is not leadership to consider your losses first. It's not leadership to see human beings as collateral damage and numbers. It is a weakness, and each one of us needs to understand our value, regardless of what the so-called leadership decides to assign. That's part of being resilient, is understanding that you matter, and you do. That's why I do this full time, guys. The podcasting, the classes, the message, the writing, everything I do is to help ensure that you know your value, because that is the only thing that is going to ensure a greater future. The more of us who understand our value, not in an ego-based way, but in an understanding that our lives matter, we have the ability to make choices for our own selves, regardless of circumstances, even if the choice is to determine our mood through the experience. We have a choice. We have the ability to understand that we have skills and skill sets. The late, great H. Stephen Glenn, PhD, who certified me as a resiliency specialist. He was the founding researcher of resiliency studies. And he always said, be a guide on the side, not a sage on the stage. And that's why I'm constantly just offering information, and what you do with it is yours. I'm never going to judge people for where they're at on their path. Some people are ahead, some people are more behind, but it doesn't make you greater or lesser. But as he taught, there are 3 concepts that each person has to know to some degree in order to ensure resilience, the ability to bounce back regardless of circumstances. It's not strength. It's the ability to be adaptable and resourceful, is resiliency. To remain standing, even in the face of chaos. And those concepts are, I am capable. I have influence over my own life. I matter. Those concepts, those 3, help you. Now, what I don't want to see in my comments on Spotify or anywhere else is you saying, but I'm not. I don't know that I have influence. I don't know that I matter. Nobody cares. Then you're screwed. The time for hand-holding is past. You better suck it up, Buttercup, and you'd better figure out what you're capable of. Whether you're capable of making a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, making yourself something to eat, even if it's a frickin' sandwich, you're capable. If you don't know how to do something, you're capable of learning. It might take some people a little longer. You may need to look at it from 3 different directions, but knowing you're capable of doing it is essential. Knowing you're capable of learning new things, because every single human being is capable to one degree or another. Knowing that you matter. That's not about because other people tell you. It's not because I tell you you matter. It's not because I see your value. It's not because a teacher told you or your parents told you or didn't tell you. You need to know it because it does matter. Existential dread doesn't make you an intellectual. It's very popular on college campuses, and everybody wants to read Nietzsche. Give it up. It's tired. You do matter. Because you are here now, incarnated. Spirit made matter. And then I have influence. I get to decide how I walk through the situation. You may not have influence over the happenings and the happenstance of what's going on. If you live in a war zone, you can't control some events in life. You can't control the weather, regardless of what people think about weather machines, which is the dumbest shit I've ever heard. People would so much rather believe in evil geniuses than take responsible for the role they play in life. It's just, oh my God. So you have influence over how you manage through events. And that makes a huge difference when you don't just have to react. And I talked about that last week. Go listen to that episode if you haven't yet. So, speaking of making your inventories and knowing your value and knowing your skill sets, we're going to talk about that as we talk about the first of 2 new moons in Virgo and what that means. All right, why don't we get on with it? All right, let's talk about that new moon sandwich we've got going on through Virgo season. We've got the moon moving into new phase on August 23rd. So Virgo season starts 22nd. The new moon happens on the 23rd, early hours of the morning on the East Coast. And it's at 0 degrees of Virgo, which is fresh start energy. It's wild card energy. Why do I say wild card? It means kind of anything within the spectrum of expression of Virgo is possible. New moons don't tend to bring kabooms. This new moon is square Uranus in Gemini, but it could more be to do with weather, okay? But it doesn't tend to be the big bada booms you see with the full moon, because that's a big release of energy. New moon is starting to gather energy. So there's that. And because the new moon in September is at 29 degrees of Virgo, making this time period between new moons what we call the black moon, just like 2 full moons in the same sign are called a blue moon. It is an interesting time. And I can already hear you saying, can I manifest? Of course you can. Of course you can. Now, I kind of like the 2 new moons in a single sign because it gives you like a 2-parter to refine, especially in Virgo, refine your intentions, right? Too often, we don't think about what we actually really want. Like, people will repeat things they think will be acceptable to other people. So, if I'm leading a course and I say, okay, what's your goal? About half of everybody's going to go financial freedom without having deconstructed what that actually means. Like, have you parsed it apart? What does financial freedom mean to you? Well, I can buy whatever I want, or I can buy a house. Just any house? What kind of house? Well, my dream house. Well, what's your dream house look like? People will dodge the questions every time. So this Virgo new moon, this first one, just the one in August, I'm not going to really talk too much about the one in September because I want you to do this first, okay? It's process-oriented, especially because it's in Virgo. I want you to take an inventory. I want you to take an inventory of your skills. That could be your ability to process your emotions, your ability to step back and be the observer, your ability to perceive details, whatever your observational skills are. Actual skill sets, are you good at spreadsheets? Are you good at using the PowerPoint or different softwares? Or do you have skills in the garden? Do you have a kind of a license or certification? So are you a certified coach or a certified instructor or a CPA, or what certifications do you have? What skill sets go along with that? I want you to get really, really specific and write it down in a journal. And then I want you to go around your house and I want you to take a look at, like, what is your inventory in the household of consumables, food, items like socks, shoes, underwear, blankets, because it's probably going to be a pretty cold winter, or at least wet. whether it's snow or rain up in the northern hemisphere. It's probably going to be pretty cold. So I want you to kind of take stock. What do you have in your pantry? What do you already possess? Do you have enough batteries? Do you have enough matches? Do you have enough, and if you don't use matches, because sometimes you have to light a fire, right? Not everybody, don't just light things on fire, but if you need it for alternative heating sources or cooking, you can actually, if the power goes out, you can actually use emergency tea lights in a muffin tin, the things you can make muffins in, right? Not the silicone, the metal ones. And you can put a tea light in all of those little, say you have one that has 6 spaces for muffins, right? Put tea light in each one of the 6 spaces and light them. And you can put a pan on that. And you can fry eggs. Okay. So take stock. Do you have chickens? Do you have ducks? Do you live somewhat rurally? How's your garden looking? What kind of preservation are you doing? Are you making jams, jellies? Are you using the dehydrator? If you don't, do you belong to a CSA? Is there a local farmer stand you can go to or a farm? What can you do? It takes stock of what you've got first. Okay, we're going to work from a strength-based perspective, both internally and externally. And that's really, really important, guys. If you always come from a place of, well, I don't have this and I don't have that and I need this and we don't have enough of that and that thing we have is shitty, you're kind of hosed. Okay. I'm not telling you be positive for no reason. I'm telling you work from a strength base. So work from what you actually have. Some people are going to have more than others. Not everybody has everything they need, but you're going to start with what you've got. Okay. All right. And then you're going to start writing down how you can make that better. Okay, so I already have this and I can make it better this way. So notice you're starting from a strength versus kind of beating yourself for not having enough or not being prepared or blah, blah, blah. So you're going to start with I have and I can make it better this way. So that's super cool. Another thing you can do between now and the 23rd is observe your day-to-day habits. So what do you do first thing in the morning? How do you start your day? Really pay attention to it. Don't just do it. Pay attention to it. Journal your habits. And then look at how you spend each day between now and the 23rd. And at the end of the day, tally up what you've done. Write a little bit about it. First thing I get up, I go to the bathroom. I go out, I make a cup of coffee, drink my coffee, maybe have a little toast or whatever, and then I go take my shower, brush my teeth, get dressed, get ready for work, head in, to the bus or the car or the train or whatever you're doing. Get the kids ready. Is there any part of that schedule that if you were to revise it, it would make your life easier? How many times do you go, oh, God, I wish I would remember to do this? So what else could you do? Do you always leave a light on before you leave? Do you forget to turn off the TV? What are some things that could change to make your life more efficient, effective, or just easier? Okay. And put that down in your journal because you're going to set intentions around increasing efficiency in your life or making changes that benefit you in your day-to-day life. Now, if I can hear it already. Well, what if I want to leave my job? Please don't leave your job right now. Rage apply, do not rage quit. It still stands. Okay. So you can set intentions around what kind of work environment do you want to be in? Who are the people you want on your team? Who are the people you want to see day in and day out? Who would make your day better? Is there somebody already on the team who does? Like you always look forward to seeing them. You might work in different departments, but it could be somebody at work. So write down the qualities. And you don't say, well, I don't want to work out with, I don't want to work in an office full of assholes. Boy, way to tell the universe, send that to me. That's not it. Well, I really enjoy working with people who are considerate. I really enjoy working with people who think about the whole team who are team players. I really enjoy working for someone who knows how to give clear directions. I really love people who don't have so many meetings but know when it's an email. Yeah. So I appreciate people who have really clear policies. Those are all things you can write down to bring in more of. And you're just planting baby seeds. This is like first salvo, because remember, we have that second moon in Virgo in September. And we'll talk more about that when we get closer to it. But for right now, you're going to take some inventories. You're going to assess and look at what part of your life can be zhuzhed a little, to be refined a little bit. And if you want to know how to set intentions with this new moon, I'm going to talk about that in the Patron only podcast. And you'll get your blow by blow on what house that new moon is falling into at 0 degrees of Virgo. And you follow along, and then I'll help you set your intentions for that. If you're not sure about how to find the houses, boy, do I have a deal for you. August 29th, I'm doing an event with the real medium Matilda, because she wants to know what I'm going on about when I talk astrology. She wants to know a little bit more about her chart. So she's going to be up on camera with me, and I'm going to walk her through understanding her chart so she can understand what the hell I'm going on about when I say things like where that new moon is going to fall in your natal chart. So we're going to be making sense of those things. You can find the link to that event in the show notes. If you're a patron at the $15 level and up, you get that event for free. Your code is in a special post that you can see at your level. Patrons at the other levels and the general public get in for $15. This will help make sense of the astrology chart. No, it's not going to teach you how to read it, but it's going to teach you how to identify what astrologers are talking about when we say, hey, look for this or look for that or find this. Well, I'm going to point out the parts of the chart to help you understand what I'm going on about. And even if you already know this stuff, I really encourage you to join, because it's going to be super fun, because Matilda and I are always goofballs when we get together. So I thought this would be a fun way of presenting the information and giving people a laugh, because, well, things are serious enough. So that's going to happen on August 29th. You can find out more about that by clicking the link in the show notes. All right, let's do some patron shout outs, speaking of Patreon, and then we'll talk about the French Resistance and a little bit about the Stalin Pact. All right, let's do our patron shout outs. Big thanks to our newest patrons this month. We've got Divine, Sammy, Pre, Lisa, Norman, Michelle, Jillian, Champagne, Becky, Holograve Cosmetics, Nathan, Mona, Nadia, Carly, WP, Jessica, Lisa, Lori, Brianna, Becca, Megan, Claudia, Sarah, Amelia, or Amalia, Flo, Letty, Alma, Amelia, totally spelled different, TJ, Alyssa, Jackie, Sarah, Mia, whoa, it's Soph, Jacqueline, Chandler and Kristen, Gemma, Nova, Fern, Sandy, Malin, Sean, Misha, Marissa, Amanda, Sarah, Jessica, Ray, Hazel, T, Brandy, Courtney, Becky, Amy, JJ, JC, Uncle Kate, SCM, Luna Blue, Judy, Renee, Robin, Sam, Haley, Camilo, Stephanie, Jillian, Denise, James, Billy, Paige, Spiritual Enlightening, Candace, Teresa, Maz, Jess, Denise, Megan, Gabriella, Ashley, Stephanie, Giovanna, Bree, Colleen, Andrea, Jeanette, chimes in, Micah, Melly, Christine, Kirsty, Lily, Sue, Jenny, Lil, Liz, CD, Karina, Cheryl, Janelle, Karen, Teresa, Jacqueline, Robin, Katie, Abriel, Janice, Katie, Corrine, Bee's Knees, Christine, Anna Marie, Brianna, Jonna, Melissa, Amanda, Carolina, Jamie, M. Ryan, Sarah, Tina, Laura, Debbie, Jen, Marciela, Jessica, Nicole, Malcy, Liz, Ariel, Farah, Sheila, Melissa, Katie, Courtney, Atomic Flea, Joanna, Dina, Stephanie, Jordy, Jasmine, Ashley, Mujo, 94, Sonia, Erica, Jen, LMAO, Welp, Tamika, Courtney, Diane, Manda, Rachel, Sonia, Marcy, Shana, or Shania, LG, Leni, Veronica, Jean, Carolyn, Courtney, Dana, Christy, Jen, Bridget G, Shannon, Audrey, Spooky Latte, Elizabeth, Beam, Susie, Brittany, Sarah, Tamika, Brandy, Zoe, Brenda, Laura, Mary, Bethany 74, Christopher, Jessica, Amanda, Justice 303, 12-foot scale Kelly, Fire Girl, Beth, Hannah, Sarah, Ann, Ryan, Christy, Leslie, Gab, Vermicelli Magnifico, Serena, Athena, Alicia the Cynic, Mina, Paloma, Alicia, Sarah or Sarah, Kaylee, and Lindsay. So I've talked a lot about this over the last 5 years, been telling you to think French Resistance, not French Revolution. And I know that it would be nice to bring out the guillotines. It would be gratifying, wouldn't it? We get so tired of people getting away with all kinds of shenanigans. But the problem is that there hasn't been a single revolution that really benefited the common person. If you look back at history, and there's a lot of propaganda around those revolutions, whether it's the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There was a lot of propaganda about how it benefited the common person. But when you actually go study the time period, the revolution is one group of people or a person wanting the power instead of that power being in that other person's hand. And what they usually do is they convince a whole bunch of people on the ground that this is going to benefit them. And much like D-Day, they throw bodies at it, and that's the cannon fodder, right? Can't really afford a revolution right now, as it certainly wouldn't help people. Revolutions don't always have to be violent. The most revolutionary thing you could do is radically love yourself and understand your value, because you're a hell of a lot harder to manipulate at that point. I bring up the French Revolution and the French Resistance to kind of show two different ways of doing things. The resistance was done by average citizens a lot of the time, just everyday people who did not want Nazi Germany being in charge of their town. And so, funny enough, they didn't stand up on a soapbox and give a speech, because that would have got them hung. Okay. They did very subtle acts. Sometimes they'd get a message from someone who would say, put a key in a pie. Here's the key. Put it in a pie. Put it on your windowsill. And don't look out If the pie's still there by 5 o'clock Sunday afternoon, remove the pie. Don't be suspicious. That be things like that. Okay. It wasn't somebody who was like, oh man, people are going to remember me in history. People are going to tell stories about me and know I was on the right side of history. No. It was somebody who was like, hey, I don't want those guys running my town. I don't like this. I don't like the way they're taking our stuff. I don't like the limitations on what we can eat. I don't like the financial repercussions. I do not want this to happen. I'm going to resist it in this way. Now, you can look up the French Resistance through the Library of Congress. And if you look up resources and books, they have a nice reading list. But you can look it up on Wikipedia. I'm not gonna read through that for us here. Okay. The reason why I bring up the French Resistance is because that is the tactics we need to take today. And as much as I talked about it at the beginning, I'm going to say it again. Being loud does not help you right now. Have you not noticed they are putting in a new terms of service on September 13th that says basically you can't be real critical of the government? And if you are, you need to be really, really careful. And if you want to support certain people over other certain people in different conflicts that may or may not be raging around the world, you have to get creative in talking about it. Should you be able to say things with your full chest? Absolutely, of course you should. Whether or not it gets censored, it can also mark people for reprisals. So it's important to be cautious in our language. Okay. Not every opinion needs expressing. Doesn't mean you should change your mind, change how you think, but you do need to think about how you're speaking about things. Okay. I'll talk about this in a lot more detail in the Patreon. But one of the things I found really interesting with the astrology of the day the resistance was called into being by Charles de Gaulle, who ended up being the president of France. So it's very interesting when we look at the French resistance chart when Charles de Gaulle called it into being. He asked people to resist the German occupation, which was welcomed by the current president at the time, Patron, and they just rolled on into Paris. Now, believe it or not, there was resistance on one of the German generals' sides as well, because he was told to demolish Paris and he chose not to, which is good because Paris has a lot of culturally significant buildings and a whole lot of people. So resistance can just be as simple as, I didn't hear you, what? Right. It was not a well-organized movement to start with. And the biggest danger people had was their neighbor turning on them. Because it, just like today, there's people who think they're going to be more comfortable. Why do you think people voted against their interests? And not just for the person who holds the highest office in this country, but whether you're looking at local, state representatives and senators, people often don't fight the known to replace it with unknown, because even if it isn't the most comfortable, they're familiar with it. And some people use that as an excuse, like, oh, well, but I know that guy and I don't like him, but I know what I'm getting. I'm going to say that's a chicken shit thing to do if somebody's not representing you well. I'm like, take the change at that point. The reason I'm bringing up the French resistance is because I really think people need to be a little quieter now. I think people need to be more strategic now. I'm not saying stop fighting what's going on, but I want you to prepare for possible reprisals. It might happen. It might not happen. Things aren't going well with the executive right now. The thing in Alaska was horrendous. Putin's speech made me really, really nervous. As somebody who specialized in international relations, okay, it was a very disconcerting speech. You know, all the cooperation between the United States and Russia, and yes, we did have cooperation in World War II. We were not sworn enemies in World War II. We weren't a fan of the Bolshevik regime and the Lenin and Stalin regime because communism. You know, I'm going to say if you don't want to have a popular uprising, don't treat people like shit, basically, because that's what the czars did. But we weren't sworn enemies like we were post World War II. Putin's speech just, again, it made me very nervous. Trump literally had zero control. Certainly didn't come to any understanding. It was just very bizarre. So it concerned me. Rob, one of my patrons, said, "Hey, look up the Stalin Pact." And I went, "Oh, yeah." I was thinking of that, and I just thought it was really funny because I was like, yeah, because the Stalin Pact kept coming to mind the more Putin talked. So we'll take a look at that astrology. I'm going to go into more detail in the Patron-only podcast about what my thoughts are, just because I prefer to do that behind closed doors. But if we look at, what was it, August 23rd, 1939 was the Stalin Pact. And I think it was revised to the 22nd. So funny enough, we had Pluto at 1 degree of Leo, which is almost exactly where it was when the French Resistance started, on that call, you know, the call for it when de Gaulle made his speech. Pluto was direct. There was an awful lot in Leo. The sun was at 29 degrees. 25 degrees of Leo was Venus, and then Mercury was in Leo. It was very interesting. Mars was retrograde in Capricorn at the time. We were watching leadership and roles in Europe change at the time. Both Jupiter and Saturn were also in retrograde. Jupiter was in Aries and Saturn was in Taurus. Uranus was in Taurus as well, and Uranus is going to be moving back into Taurus in October of this year, which I find fascinating. But when we look at what's coming up in October of this month, October of 2025, we've got Mercury, Mars, and the Moon around the 22nd of October in Scorpio. And we have Venus and the Sun in Libra. Even a couple days before that, the Sun is square Jupiter in Cancer. And so it's very interesting energy, especially with the Sun in a square with Jupiter. That's pretty gnarly. And what's interesting is during the World War II era, we had Neptune in Virgo. And Neptune's going to be back in Pisces in October. In fact, October 22nd, Neptune in Pisces is at 29 degrees, 59 minutes. So it's just re-entered Pisces on the retrograde. Saturn will be at 26 degrees and 15 minutes of Pisces. And we've got Pluto will be direct at that point. So Uranus won't have quite have gotten to Taurus yet. It's still in Gemini. It's a really, really fascinating chart. I think the people in the United States will continue to stand up for what's right. I know everybody wants to hear, when is it going to happen? I think people think it will be better if somebody keels over. I'm going to tell you, I don't think it is. Um, it's a much bigger problem than him. In fact, I would say it's a much bigger problem than we think we see. I think eventually, when the truth comes out, it's going to be horrendously shocking. And horrendously shocking that people who may have spoken about defending our interests as a nation and the people of the nation's interests, will find out that people may have talked a good game, but were also compromised. And I'm not just talking about the Epstein list. I think there's other stuff. And I think the real issue on the Epstein list has to do with this bigger problem. And I think reality will be blown out of the water. I think people will be like, what the hell? And those are all possibilities coming up. We could see things break free, leaks happen, information come out. But I wouldn't hold my hopes up to it. You know, these things happen when people dig a hole and they fall in. I think there's quite a few people who so-called representatives who have been so compromised that there's no digging themselves out of the hole that they've created. So that's a possibility. When you operate from a smart form of resistance, you just go about your day and you live your life. You don't necessarily run around telling everybody. Okay? You don't. You just do your do. Just do your do. I remember living somewhere where I was part of a network that helped women who were in domestic violence situations find safe harbor. And you would just get notified, usually through notes, even though phone calls and emails existed at the time. Because I'm not so old, there wasn't a telephone, no cell phones, beepers. And I would never, ever have a pager ever again. I keep my cell phone off. I mean, I hate the dings. But anyway, we'd get a notice and then we might have to go meet someone in a public space, and they would have already been prepped not to say anything too loud, because our job was to kind of do discovery and then make sure they got to the next stage, whoever it was that was helping them do the next thing in their journey, whether it was getting airplane tickets and getting them the hell out, or finding them some temporary shelter while they worked on other things and legal matters, getting them to the right legal people that were part of the network, things like that. There's lots of ways to resist, but being loud about it can put yourself and other people at danger. Okay? A lot of people are looking to be seen as being on the right side of history. Edith Piaf, who was an amazing chanteuse, a French singer, best known for Je ne regrette rien. I regret nothing is the song. She was accused of collaboration with the Germans because she performed for the Germans, but she was actually part of the French Resistance. And so when people are like, I noticed, it's kind of funny, Taylor Swift has been a little quiet politically, but she's already on the record for being very, very clear about where she stands with Trump. And I've seen several people be highly critical of her. She should be doing more. She should be speaking. She probably donates a lot you never hear about, because we know she's treated her staff very well. Okay. If you're a good person, you don't necessarily announce your deeds. All right. And I'm not a Swiftie. Okay. I think her music's okay. It's a little beboppy for me in general, but she's decent, and she's built herself up very well. She's known to dislike Trump. She's she's been harassing him online. She's not now. The smart thing to do is get quiet so they're not paying attention to you as much, so you can take different kinds of actions. The common person out in the world who doesn't make content at all has a lot of expectations on what people who do should do. And not every content creator is going to be apprised of politics. They're not going to necessarily have an educated opinion on it. And just mouthing off to make you feel better so that you know you're in agreement could actually put their career at risk to the point where they can't really be of service. I had people be upset because I wasn't being vocal over certain matters. And I'm like, yeah, but I am in my Patreon, and the people who support me know where I stand. I'm not necessarily going to speak about it on TikTok or YouTube or even here, where it goes through Spotify. I'm a big fan of living to fight another day instead of getting all of the attention. If you want to be really good at resistance work, you want to do your best to use your invisibility cloak, whatever it is. Okay. It's that important. Needing to be seen as being in the right doesn't always help you. Okay. It just doesn't. So there's that. Let's look at, I do want to take a look at the Stalin Pact, and I will read from what I found online here. Hang on. All right. So the actual name of Hitler's Stalin Pact, or and Nazi Soviet Pact, was also called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Treaty of Non-Aggression between Germany and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So first of all, if you get a non-aggression treaty, almost every single time there's going to be a war. Almost every single time. It's something I noticed as an undergrad with international relations. I was just like, man, every time they sign one, there's a war. It's like within weeks, so one of those things. It was a pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union with a secret protocol establishing Soviet and German spheres of influence across Eastern Europe. The pact was signed in Moscow on the 23rd of August, 1939. So what they did is they kind of divvied up, like, oh, I'll take this piece, you take that piece. I'll take this piece, you'll take that piece. And when I hear them talk about Ukraine, it kind of sounds like, they want to get Ukraine, of course, to agree to the Crimea matter. And in other episodes, I've talked about like the Crimean War in the 1800s and how it kind of fed into what's going on now. Of course, we hear that they're making the excuse that, the aggressed party, the party that didn't start the war but is holding and not capitulating, is now somehow responsible for the peace. And it just sounds like a very familiar tactic when you look at what's going on in the Levant. Abusive people do that. They'll hit you and then be, absolutely scandalized if you hit them back. Now they have to defend themselves. They hit you. It was just a joke. You haul off and hit them. Well, now I've got to punish you and defend myself because you acted erroneously. How dare you? So we're going to hear a lot of that rhetoric as we move over the week. I thought it was very fascinating that they called Zelensky in to the White House, and then Europe said, hey, we'll show up with you. And so it's going to be a very interesting week as we watch the geopolitical landscape go forward. If you want to know what I think is going to be in the headlines, you'll have to head over to Patreon because I don't do that here anymore. That's back behind the paywall. And the reason for that is I can just speak much more freely. I've pushed it this episode a little bit, but anyway, that's kind of where it's at. So if you want to be inspired, go to the Library of Congress. I'll put the link in the show notes and you can click that. Check out the Library of Congress information on the French Resistance. Alrighty. That kind of is where we're at. I thought I'd share a little bit of the wins that we've had from longtime patrons. Um, every once in a while, I get a real reminder of why I do this work. And yesterday, I had more than one. So I think I'm going to end you on a positive note. I want you to deep breathe. Virgo season is on the way, so it's a good time to start processes as we move out of Leo season and bring our attention back to process. So I'll talk about that to end the podcast, just to leave you feeling good, the warm fuzzies. Well, I had the great pleasure of meeting with my cosmic surfers on Saturday, and that's a tier that's not available anymore. And a lot of the members of this tier have been with me since at least 2022, many of them since 2021. And I always say, I don't do the work. I'm not responsible for your healing or your progress. I'm responsible for bringing you a framework. It's up to you on how you take action with that. And it was such a beautiful afternoon that we spent together as we used the Annie process for meetings, and that's the alignment process, to keep meetings moving on time and make sure every voice is heard and everybody's seen. And people were really, really celebrating and bringing in some big wins, whether it was Tracy St. Croix's new television show that is up on Binge TV called Haunted Road Trips. And it's coming in at #1 on Binge TV. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. To Kim, who, has, like many people, had a bumpy 2025, but it's just riding it even and managing to just move through and find opportunity and thrive in the midst of chaos. And it certainly wasn't an easy year, but just building and growing together. To other members, just finding their center, finding their core, understanding their value, knowing how to show up for themselves, their families, and as they build forward. So many people at different life stages, right? But just firmly planted where they are and ready to move on and grow from there. And in listening to everybody's stories and knowing where they started, you know, and hearing the immense amount of growth, the pride in knowing they did the work, that, no one trying to credit me with their process. They know I brought the framework. Don't worry, they don't leave me out either. But what I love about it is that people know they've done it. They've done the work. I don't like it when people give other people credit for the efforts they put in. Give credit if they brought material and say, thank you for the material, it helped me grow. But the work is done by you. We can lead a horse to water, but we can't make it drink. The people who manage to put in the time and put in the effort will see results every step of the way. And it was just very inspiring. And I thought, man, if I needed a refresher on why I do this, that'd be it. So it was really beautiful. It was really beautiful. Maverick, longtime patron, uh, is starting to explore professional astrological readings and was like, hey, are you teaching how to do these? And so yes, in September I'll have a class on reading techniques, to help you if you want to read for other people. how to start and end a session, how to deliver information. I'm going to be teaching a couple of astrology classes in September. So stay tuned for that. I don't have anything up for it yet, but stay tuned for it. As you know, I'm going to be doing the how to make sense of your astrology chart so you can understand what Laurie's saying. And I'm going to be doing that with Medium Matilda. She's going to be the guinea pig. She's going to be the person I'm explaining everything to on camera. But we're also going to be having, so keep October in mind. It'll be in early October, I believe the first week, maybe the second week. I have to go back and look. But anyway, we'll get it up soon. We're going to do our 2026 predictions together. Remember, I've already got mine out. I did mine in June. I'll do a follow-up in December. But the two of us are going to combine forces, and we will wow you and dazzle you with our sassiness and our predictions. So you'll be seeing some stuff online with our past event predictions. We've had a lot come in, hard and heavy, and eerily, spookily accurate. So, but neither one of us do the predictions as the main calling of our work. We do it to show our accuracy, and we do it to keep people informed so they can prepare if necessary. Alrighty. I want to thank you for listening this week. I'm Laurie Rivers, and I'll catch you next week as we wind up August of 2025 together. How crazy. I'll get you ready for September next week. All right. Have a good one. Set those intentions.